Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Glad you're with us. Let me get a couple things out of the way here as we get ready to get going here today. A little bit of a weird schedule for us. We have a great guest coming up on our program today. It's the former UGA great, SEC network analyst Matt Stinchcomb, going to be with us live here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza today. But Matt had a couple schedule things he had to try to accommodate today. He was good enough to squeeze us in, so we're actually going to do him later than our normal guest. Normally we do a guest around the 15-minute mark in the show. Today we're going to do Matt here live around 11 a.m. Eastern time, so it's about the 1 hour mark. So we're going to go long a bit today to welcome in Matt to the program, but you're going to want to hear this. Matt's got some great thoughts on the upcoming season for Georgia, and he's also got a great event coming up on Saturday night as well, that if you're a UGA fan looking to enjoy some Georgia football talk for a very, very good cause, well, you'll enjoy what Matt's going to tell you about when he joins us here about an hour from right now, 11 a.m. Eastern time, at least if you're watching the show live, or about the 1 hour mark on the video if you're catching us up late. You'll notice a couple things different about our desk today, kind of freshening up our look a bit here today. You'll notice the brand new SEC champion sticker on my laptop. I'll enjoy that. And our buddy Eddie's got his own sign here now. Eddie representing Gator Hater credentials for sure here with his own sign here. The sign's not, to be completely honest, affixed quite as tightly as I'd like for it to be, so it may fall off during the show, but we'll fix that over the course of our time here. We're just kind of freshening things up and having a good time. Unfortunately, not a good time, though, for the folks in Ohio State, and the reverberations from whatever might eventually happen for Urban Meyer, they could impact George. I'm going to tell you how to start the program here today. I'm glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I hope you'll pardon me for starting the program today with something that's not at least specifically related to the University of Georgia, but I've gotten enough feedback on Twitter and social media over the last 24 hours or so that people are curious about this, so I feel a little bit of a freedom to sort of address the Urban Meyer stuff off the top of the program here today, including how it could potentially impact some of the recruits that Georgia has been chasing, will chase here for the classes of 2019 and 2020. Really interesting stuff coming up on that. For many of you, you may not be 100% aware of kind of what's gone on here with Ohio State coach Urban Meyer, now placed on administrative leave. Let me see if I can give you the backstory on this as quickly as I possibly can to sort of set us up for where we're going today. Zach Smith was wide receivers coach at Ohio State. He has now been fired, in part stemming from some alleged domestic violence incidents occurring with his then wife, Courtney Smith, when Urban Meyer spoke at Big Ten Media Days a few days ago. He did his part then to try to address the situation, and in speaking here at Big Ten Media Days, Urban Meyer may have opened up a can of worms that could potentially cost him his job at Ohio State. Let me let you hear Coach Meyer as a way of explaining that.
2009, Zach was an intern, a very young couple. As I do any time that I imagine most coaches or people in leadership positions, you receive a phone call, first thing you do is tell your boss, let the experts do their jobs. We're certainly not going to investigate. It came back to me that what was reported wasn't actually what happened, and so Shelley and I actually both got involved because of our relationship with that family, and advised for counseling and wanted to help as we move forward. 2015, I got a text late last night that something happened in 2015, and there was nothing, unless, once again, there's nothing. Once again, I don't know who creates a story like that. And then this recent one was, you press pause. It's something our team lives by, E plus R equals O. You get an event, you press pause, get your mind right and step up. Press pause to gather information, get your mind right to gather energy, and then step up to do the right thing. That's the position that I hold, and that's why we did that.
So Urban Meyer says about his now ousted wide receivers coach that there was this thing in 2009. Come to find out, the facts, according to Meyer, were different than they had initially been explained to him. And whatever happened in 2015 with Zach Smith and his alleged domestic abuse against his then spouse, Urban Meyer says he just found out about that the day before Big Ten Media Days. Well, the issue here for Urban Meyer is the actual facts may be different than what Meyer explained there. Brett McMurphy is a longtime college football reporter on his own Facebook page, wrote about this yesterday and appeared on ESPN, ironically his former employer, last night, to explain how his reporting differs from the account given by Urban Meyer, and here is where the plot very much thickens. Here's Brett McMurphy.
A couple of weeks ago at Big Ten Media Days, I found out that Zach Smith had been arrested back in Florida in 2009. I also obtained a police report from the Powell, Ohio Police Department in 2015. I reported that. 50 minutes later, Zach Smith was fired. Urban Meyer then, the next day, said he had no knowledge of the 2015 incident. He even asked why I would create such a story. We fast forward a couple days. I start following, trying to report the story more. I'm seeing where it's going to take me. I hit some dead ends. Ultimately, I was able to get a hold of Courtney Smith. I talked to her. I spent 3 days in Columbus. And after talking to her, I got documents, texts, emails, photos, and basically it showed that the entire coaching staff, the wives of the coaching staff, knew what had been going on. And in these text message conversations, it showed that Urban Meyer knew about this. Urban Meyer, however, had said the week before he had no knowledge of this. But when Urban denied any knowledge of it at Big Ten Media Days on Tuesday, and then I had evidence that showed the contrary, then basically that's where we are now.
So things start to get a little ugly here for Urban Meyer. You can hear the disdain in Brett McMurphy's voice when he says Urban Meyer dared say who would even make up such a story like this, when McMurphy's got some pretty specific evidence that proves that, at least according to McMurphy, that he didn't make this stuff up at all, that Urban Meyer knew about this long before he said he did at Big Ten Media Days. Making things potentially worse for Urban Meyer is Courtney Smith. Now, Courtney Smith is the former wife of Zach Smith, the fired Ohio State wide receivers coach here, and she appeared on Stadium, which is sort of a streaming video service, and with Stadium, which is the name of the company, she kind of explained exactly how things unfolded way back in 2009 when Smith and Meyer were both at Florida, and in 2015, and this does not paint a pretty picture for what was going on behind the scenes there with a coach on Urban Meyer's staff. Here is Courtney Smith.
I was scared. I did tell my parents. I told his parents as well. I remember specifically texting pictures to my mom, my dad, his dad, like begging for help. Like, this has to stop. This isn't normal. I can't do this anymore. And I was told, don't call the police. If you call the police, he's going to get arrested. It's going to go to the media. He's going to lose his job. What are you and the kids going to do? And anyone who's been abused, you really do think you can change them. You think, well, if I do something different, he'll change. And it's not the case. They don't change.
It's heartbreaking to hear her say there that her own family, the people closest to her, were advising her not to go to the authorities and go full on with the accusation against her husband. You can understand how she maybe felt trapped in this scenario. It's a heartbreaking situation for her. And as far as how Urban Meyer kind of factored into all this, and Urban Meyer's wife, Shelly Meyer, speaking to Stadium, Courtney Smith went into a little bit more detail about that. And this is what's at issue for Urban Meyer and why his status as Ohio State coach is now very much in question.
In 2015, I came forward with it. I told Shelly. I sent her some pictures. I spoke to her on the phone. And that was because at that point, we were legally separated, and enough is enough. If I leave the marriage, I'm hoping this is going to stop. This has to stop. Shelly she said she was going to have to tell Urban. She was going to have to tell Urban. I said, that's fine. You should tell Urban. We can't have somebody like this coaching young men.
Did she ever come back to you and tell you that she did tell Urban?
She did not. She did not. She would reach out to me, ask me how I'm doing, tell me she was worried, that if I needed anything, she was there. When somebody is crying out for help, I believe the coach, along with the coach's wife, have a duty. They have a duty to do something to help.
So Meyer's wife, Shelly Meyer, says, I have to tell Urban about the allegations that Courtney Smith had made against her then-husband, Zach. And if Shelly followed through with that, if she did tell her husband, Urban, about this, and Urban did nothing about that, then obviously you can see how that's a big problem for him as Ohio State coach. In fact, the aftermath of this was pretty immediate in terms of reaction. I want to take you to former UGA great David Pollack, who's now an analyst for ESPN. Now, he's not speaking on ESPN here, He's speaking on video on his own Twitter feed, but this is pretty immediate in the reaction to what had sort of learned yesterday about Urban Meyer. And David Pollack's opinion on this is pretty forceful. This is going to be a tough situation for Urban Meyer to survive as Ohio State coach if the facts continue to play out the way we think we understand them now. Here is the former UGA grade on that.
Urban Meyer's signs wherever he's been has always been respect women, and that was one of his number one rules. And this obviously coming out now is kind of a disrespect for women. So I'm very curious to see with his responses to how he's going to word this, how he's going to say things, because it's a clear violation of one of the most important rules he's had, whether it was at Utah, whether it was at Florida, or now at Ohio State. And it's huge news. I don't think he's going to make it through. I think he's going to get fired at the end of this because I think it's that big of a deal.
So he says, that's David Pollack there saying that he doesn't think that Urban Meyer is going to make it through all of this. And by the time many of you hear this show later on demand, on audio or radio, you may know more about this then than we do now, but we're reacting to this based on what we know here on this Thursday morning. And obviously, whatever went on between Zach Smith and his wife is more important than any of the football stuff, but this is obviously still a football show, and we're also a show focused in on the Georgia Bulldogs, so there is going to be some curiosity about how the potential news at Ohio State potentially impacts UGA. And the first thing we think about here are recruits that chose either Ohio State over Georgia or considering Ohio State and Georgia. How could those recruits be impacted by the potential bad news at Ohio State and the fact that Urban Meyer, the coach they thought they might play for at Ohio State, may not be there based on how this story is unfolding? Well, Jeff Sentell had some fascinating insight on this last night when he spoke on his Wednesday night Facebook Live broadcast. He addressed some of the recruits specifically that could have tough decisions to make if Urban Meyer gets some bad news about his future there with the Buckeyes. Here is Jeff Sentell bringing a few names back to mind here.
Everybody wants to know about Urban Meyer and Ohio State and how things are affected there. I think it shakes up a lot of targets, actually. The names that come to mind, Legend Cavazos, who had Georgia among his finalists. He chose Ohio State. Now, Legend's family did have great connections to Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer goes back a long way with that family when the father there was a high school coach and Urban was a young recruiter at Notre Dame. Got to remember, though, Georgia will be a strong contender should things happen with Legend and he decides to open it up. And a name I'm seeing a lot is Harry Miller as well. Harry Miller out of Buford is a phenomenal player. I would not raise my eyebrow at any scouting opinions out there that say the young man there is probably just as good or better than Clay Webb, which is saying quite a lot. I think with other guys like Justin Rogers, I think it would make it very clear for Justin Rogers where he would need to wind up.
So you hear three really big names there from Jeff Sentell. Legend Cavazos, the defensive back from IMG Academy, who recently committed to Ohio State. Harry Miller, the elite center offensive lineman from Buford that also recently committed to Ohio State. And Justin Rogers, the 2020 prospect who's uncommitted right now, but one of the top players in the country for the next recruiting cycle. Now, what's interesting about Georgia here is that, with Legend Cavazos, Georgia's also heavily involved with Lewis Cine here. How does, the cozy relationship with Lewis Cine potentially change things for Legend Cavazos? I don't know, nor do I know if Cavazos would even reconsider his Ohio State commitment right now. The same thing for a Harry Miller as well. As Jeff said, Georgia's also involved with the big 5-star offensive lineman Clay Webb from out of Alabama, who plays the same position here. But it would certainly seem that Harry Miller, a product from Buford, who I think strongly considered Georgia before choosing Ohio State, if all of a sudden the situation changed at Ohio State, maybe he does rethink that. And we know that Justin Rogers, the 2020 offensive lineman, already has very strong feelings for Georgia because he said that to DawgNation recently. It is all very interesting here. We're going to follow it all every step that it goes. Obviously, in past years, a story like this might not have had too much of an impact on the University of Georgia. Bad news for Ohio State may not have impacted Georgia much at all. Back then, it's probably fair to say that Georgia may not have been much of a national program. But Georgia was in the playoff last year. Ohio State was not. Georgia arrived on the scene as a true national program. And we thought for years to come, one of the contenders for Georgia in terms of those playoff spots and national championships might be Urban Meyer's Ohio State. But all of that might be changing now. And if it does, you better believe that's going to have big reverberations down here in the state of Georgia. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presenting by Marco's Pizza. A lot to do on today's program. Wanted to explain off the top there how the Urban Meyer stuff could potentially impact UGA, and obviously we'll keep watching that in the days ahead here as well. Want to thank you for being with us live on video at 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, DawgNation YouTube pages, also the DawgNation Twitter feed, on the radio every day at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, pretty much wherever podcasts can be found. Apple Podcast Player, Google Podcast Player for those of you on Android, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad you're with us on DawgNation Daily here today. We have a very special guest coming up on our program today. We will tell you about that in a moment. Before that, let me also thank Marco's Pizza for being a big part of our program. And of course, you know that Marco's is the MVP with dough made fresh, an original sauce recipe, and 3 signature cheeses on every pizza. And right now, you can get 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas at a great everyday value for just $6.99 each. Order today from Marcos.com. And like I said, that's no special coupon. That's no promo code. That's the everyday value right there to Marco's Pizza. Every store, every day, the Italian way. Go to Marcos.com for more information on that. All right. I have got a lot I'm going to try to do on today's program. And some of this, because I went a little long on the Urban Meyer stuff, I'm going to have to push back later on the program. I don't know if you've been following the Roquan Smith story at all in the NFL, but this is really fascinating. And I don't want to do this now because I don't have time to do the whole deal here. So let me push this back for later on. But really, really interesting stuff when it comes to Roquan Smith. Maybe one of the more unlikely holdout candidates you would have thought when his NFL career began, when he was drafted by the Chicago Bears. But a weird twist of fate has sort of put him in the crosshairs. And a lot of folks in the NFL paying very close attention to how all of this unfolds there in Chicago with Roquan Smith. I want to tell you more about that. I think Georgia fans are going to be really fascinated by that. But before that, I do want to set up our special guest here today because Matt Stinchcomb is one of the great former Georgia Bulldogs who I think makes all of DawgNation proud with the way that he's gone on to become a terrific analyst for the SEC network. This is a sharp football mind. It's always really good to hear his thoughts on the upcoming season. We're going to do that with Matt Stinchcomb here. And we are also going to find out about a big event that Matt and his brother John and our buddy David Green all have going on Saturday night, raising money for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and the Georgia Transplant Foundation. This is really good stuff from what you guys like to call a good DGD. Matt Stinchcomb is certainly that, and he's going to tell you more about everything he's got going on. It's good to have him with us and good to have you with us as well as DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza rolls on. All right. Sorry for the bait and switch. But for those of you who are just joining us, I did explain off the top of our program that Matt Stinchcomb is going to be with us here today, but we're going to have to do Matt a little later. He's got a busy schedule, as you might imagine. He's going to make some time for us later on. So when we do the radio show, the podcast, we'll sort of put the pieces back together here a little bit. But stick with us around 11 a.m. if you're watching the show live. We'll have Matt here on the program. And that opens up plenty of time for our comments with you. You can sort of weigh in on anything you want to from today's show. The Urban Meyer stuff, if you're fascinated by that. Like I said, I don't know if y'all are paying attention to the Roquan Smith stuff or not. You may not particularly care about that, which I certainly understand. We can kind of weigh in on that, too, and pretty much anything else going on with Georgia football. I will tell you that practice for Georgia begins tomorrow. The open practice there in Sanford Stadium on Saturday. We're pretty much going to be all over that for the next couple of days here at DawgNation, so we can start looking ahead to that practice stuff as well. And if you want to address Legend Cavazos, if you want to address some of the names that Jeff mentioned, like Harry Miller or Justin Rogers, the 2020 offensive line, we can start doing some of that too a bit here. And we'll get back to our regular broadcast in a moment. But let me take some time to have some comments with you before we kind of get into any of that. We can be sort of loose with our format here just for a bit today. Certainly appreciate you being with us. Robert Young having some fun at Meyer's expense, going back to what happened at the end of his Florida tenure. And yeah, listen, I think that is one of the sort of unspoken subtext to the Urban Meyer stuff here is that there are a lot of people that don't like Urban Meyer. And I mean like rank and file college fans, people like me who sort of a cross between a media member and a fan, super serious blue check reporters. You're going to hear a word like sanctimonious thrown around with Urban Meyer a bit. You're going to hear a word like moralizing thrown around with Urban Meyer a bit. Part of what keeps getting pointed out in some of the columns that have been written about the Urban Meyer thing thus far are how he seems to be in violation of his own tenets and principles with the way that allegedly he has handled the situation involving Zach Smith. It's almost like there are a lot of people, reporters included here, standing at the ready to say hypocrite, and that's the shame that's being brought about on Urban Meyer right now. So that is definitely a part of this, that if he goes down, there are more than a few people who are going to somewhat be entertained by watching him go down. And actually, later on in the program, when we do our SEC through, I'm going to address that part of this, too, in terms of how this recasts his Florida years. 2 national championships, one of the all-time great SEC coaches, at least in a brief tenure, for what he did there at the University of Florida. But is what he's accused of now, or what the accusations around the Ohio State program are now, does that make you sort of rethink some of the things, the whispers, the allegations about some of the Florida players that he was in charge of going back to his time in Gainesville? We will do a lot of that coming up in just a moment. Also, Nikki Esther says, can't wait to watch our guys in the NFL. I was referencing the Roquan Smith thing a moment ago, and I will say that I am looking forward to that as well. I'm looking forward to seeing Roquan there with the Bears. Looking forward to seeing, we talked about this yesterday during our video portion of the show. Some of you are, still not so sure about, your former Georgia guys playing for the Patriots. I'm okay with that sort of in a way. I'm excited about them. Somebody brought up a great point too, Nakia, that, if you've got HBO, Hard Knocks is featuring the Cleveland Browns this year. That's the HBO show covering training camp that's coming back. I'm hoping we get to see a little bit of Nick Chubb on Hard Knocks. I think that'll be a lot of fun if we do. That'll be really good. Now, Nick Chubb's personality, probably not the most HBO-friendly personality out there, but still, it could be very interesting. Richard Smith says Roquan Smith's trying to make sure he doesn't get fined for hitting with the helmet. The Bears need to pay him normally. Yeah, Richard, I completely agree with this. When we get into the regular broadcast again in a moment, I will I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I'll play some audio from an NFL Network analyst who kind of explains the whole thing. But there's a new sort of targeting style rule in the NFL this year where you can be ejected from games in the NFL much like you could have been in college in the past. And a lot of rookie contracts in the NFL, guarantees can be voided if you're suspended. Now, most of the time, that's generally about substance abuse or performance-enhancing drugs or something along those lines. This is a relatively new concept when it comes to just playing the game too hard. And for those of us who are obsessed with college football, we know that half the time we see a targeting call in college football, it's not about some guy who's, intentionally vicious, who's trying to hurt someone. It's just a guy who's playing the game hard and kind of, the helmet gets in the wrong place the wrong time. It's almost bad luck more than malicious intent. And for the Chicago Bears to say, therefore, Roquan Smith, who's a sort of a head-hunting middle linebacker, if he gets in the wrong place the wrong time and on the wrong end of an official's call, he could have guaranteed money voided from that. I mean, I know I'm going to come across like the Georgia homer here, but I'm sorry. I do understand why Roquan Smith is holding out, why his agents are advising him to do that. I think that Smith here is potentially setting an important precedent for the league going forward here. And obviously, I probably wouldn't be paying that close attention to it if it wasn't a Georgia player. But now that I am paying close attention to it, I know what fair looks like, and this ain't fair. Mike Mazzell says, I'm going to watch Cleveland now. Yeah, watching just even seeing how Nick Chubb and Baker Mayfield sort of pair together, I think it's going to be really fun there. Ooh, Jarvis Hanna brings up a good point. I forgot about this. Javon Wims is playing tonight. So you've got the Hall of Fame game tonight? I'm going to embarrass myself here for a second. I'm not even sure which team Javon Wims plays for. That's probably a terrible thing to admit, but I'm not sure. I know that Baltimore is one of the teams involved tonight. Who's the other team in the it's Chicago. That's right. You got Chicago and Baltimore in that game. Maybe a chance to see Lamar Jackson play a little bit tonight. So that'll be actually kind of fun to see a little football back. And I completely overlooked the fact that Javon Wims was even playing. Thanks for telling us about that. Nick Lurch reminding us of some of the allegations against some of the Florida players, going back to Urban Meyer's time there. Yeah, I mean, some of that is going to be rethought of now, whether it be the Aaron Hernandez stuff, the Chris Rainey stuff. That's definitely going to be reconsidered here. Terrence Eberhard says about Legend Cavazos that he's probably rethinking his Ohio State commitment. I would imagine he probably would be. I don't think there's any doubt that he would be rethinking that a bit. Doesn't mean he changes his mind necessarily. And by the way, there's also, I guess, some chance still that Urban Meyer sort of pulls through with all of this and kind of holds together the program there at Ohio State. But definitely the Cavazos family has to be rethinking this a bit right now, including his dad, who Jeff Sentell explained last night on his Wednesday Facebook Live. The Cavazos family is very close to Urban Meyer here. So this is more than just a football thing for them. It's potentially a pretty important personal issue as well, given the fact that they have been close to Urban Meyer for quite some time. But as I said a moment ago, too, maybe Jeff would tell me I'm wrong about this, but it seems like the legend Cavazos and Louis Cine are fairly similar players. Is there room for a Cine and a Cavazos? Obviously, Cine's uncommitted right now, but a lot of Georgia fans have hopes that eventually maybe he joins the 2019 class. If you get Cine, do you still need Cavazos? Maybe that's that kind of thing that Jeff would think about. It's also a similar comparison between Harry Miller, who's committed to Ohio State. He's from Beaufort, Georgia, and Clay Webb. I mean, I will tell you that I feel like I know more about Miller than I do Webb because Miller's from Beaufort. I don't know him personally, but I've read about him at DawgNation, and whether it be like the mission work he's done in, I think, is it Nicaragua? I think the mission work that he's done there. I mean, Miller comes across like the greatest team captain type guy of all time. Now, Clay Webb may be the very same thing. I just don't know that about him quite as well. But when you read some of the profiles that Jeff Sentell has written of Harry Miller at DawgNation, it makes you really want Harry Miller. Now, it's ironic here. It goes to show you the strength of a UJ from a recruiting standpoint that we're talking about, Georgia now in the mix for 5-star offensive lineman Clay Webb, very high 4-star prospect Harry Miller, when Georgia's already loaded up so much on interior offensive linemen as of late. It just shows you the riches that Georgia's collected when it comes to recruiting here. But listen, you still got to stockpile guys at positions like that. And if Georgia could get back involved with Harry Miller, it'd be the kind of thing that'd take you about 2 seconds to say, yes, let's please do that. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment. For those of you just joining us, I will explain. We're going to have Matt Stinchcomb on the program later on. Going to have a great interview with Matt, who's got a big event coming up on Saturday night at the College Football Hall of Fame, benefiting the Georgia Transplant Foundation and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. We'll get back to our regular broadcast in a moment. We got a lot of your comments here today as well. We're dealing with the fallout from whatever may happen with Urban Meyer. So we're kind of all over the place, busy today on a DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and glad to have you with us. Ty Middlebrooke brings a really good point. I apologize. That Cavazos is 2020. That's such a good point. Thanks for clearing that up for me. You're exactly right about that. Cine's a 2019 commit and our a 2019 target, and Legend Cavazos is a 2020 target. That is a really, really good point, Ty. Appreciate that. New Level Recruiting says that Adam Anderson made Harry Miller look like a middle school lineman when Rome played Beaufort last season, and that may be true, but come on, that's Junior Baker. Adam Anderson's going to do that to a lot of people, I'm guessing. I saw a lot of highlights from Anderson where he was cleaning house like that a year ago. I'm really excited about seeing Anderson in a Georgia uniform come this fall. 98 Sports Talk says, what's next in Gainesville? Maybe meaning the University of Florida. But that's a lot to think about there for Florida here. And can you even still honor the Urban Meyer era there if Meyer loses his job at Ohio State? We are, I guess, in the 10th anniversary of Florida's 2008 national championship. I wonder how much of that you can even honor and talk about here this year. Going back to our Roquan Smith conversation from earlier, Tyson Keever says Roquan's doing the right thing. Once he inks his name, he is locked in. To protect himself, he has to make sure that all of the verbiage in is in his best interest. Tyson, I 1,000,000% agree with you on everything. No doubt about that whatsoever. Crow King 123, going back to those Halloween costumes we saw in the Florida video yesterday, says Halloween came early for the Gators, but instead of getting candy, they got tricked into thinking they would be a good football team. That's pretty funny. I like that a lot. Let me go back to Facebook here for some comments. Then we'll get back to our regular broadcast here in a moment. Yarnell Color says, what's the Urban Meyer news? For now, Urban Meyer, Yarnell has been placed on administrative leave. You got to think that Ohio State is contemplating his future, whether or not he can remain an Ohio State coach, given the way that Zach Smith, his former wide receivers coach, has been handled. Smith has lost his job. There are allegations against him of domestic abuse against his former wife. There is some thought out there that Meyer may have known about this and did nothing about it, which could be a lot of trouble there for Urban. We still don't know yet how this is going to completely end, at least based on press time, as they say, as I'm speaking to you right now at 10:34 a.m. But at some point in time, Ohio State may have to take action in on this. So kind of fascinating stuff, and obviously there's a lot being talked about. Frank Crowder says that Nick Saban's going to hire him as an analyst. I have to admit, I did sort of think about the same thing there as well. The collection of analysts that Nick Saban has brought in the past, you got to wonder if Urban Meyer uses that same car wash to rehabilitate his image, if it does indeed end for him here. Robert Young says on Facebook that Kirby's building the new dynasty in Athens. Bama's becoming a thing of the past, and everyone in Tuscaloosa knows this. It is kind of funny that if you look on those rankings of top coaches in college football, obviously Nick Saban's been number one on that list, and historically, for the last couple of years, Urban Meyer's been second, Dabo Swinney's been third. Well, if Meyer loses his job, at that point in time, how many coaches in college football would the average person take over Kirby Smart? Now, as Robert the commenter mentioned, he's not taking any coach over Kirby Smart. But let's not even say Georgia fans here for a moment, because they like their guy. Just take the average college football fan in Chicago or L.A. or Dallas or some other city that's not really in our SEC footprint here. I mean, how many coaches could objectively be ranked ahead of Kirby Smart at that time? You'd probably still say Dabo, because he's been to 3 playoffs and he's won a national championship. You'd probably say Nick Saban, because his success speaks for itself. Maybe you say Jimbo Fisher. He's one of the few coaches in college football that has a national championship, but based on his recent track record, I'm not even sure you do. It's really funny how to go from 2016, when Kirby Smart was an unknown commodity, after the 2016 season, when people thought that the resume for Kirby had a couple blemishes on it, given the 8-5 season, to the point here after the 2017 season, moving to 2018, where he may be almost objectively one of the 3 or 4 top coaches in college football. It is really funny how all of this unfolds. And I guess if you'll permit me one more point here, and then we'll get ready to get back into our regular broadcast. I didn't want to really make this a part of the official broadcast today, because I haven't really quite fully fleshed out all my thoughts on this yet. But there is, I think, one thing that Georgia ought to be paying close attention to here when it comes to how it might be coming to an end for Urban Meyer at Ohio State. One of the things that's hard to deny is that longevity is almost more difficult to produce than national championships. Now, obviously, Georgia fans are hungry for that national championship, and they think they're going to get it here in the next couple of seasons, and obviously it's understandable why Georgia fans would be that optimistic. But what you see in college football is, in some respects, it's almost easier to get a national championship than it is to keep a coach for 20 years. And ultimately, the most fun for Georgia, I think, is not in finally clutching that national championship, but enjoying all the riches and bounty that could potentially come the program's way if Kirby Smart can hang around for 20 years. And, it seemingly is something different for all these coaches. For Urban Meyer, it may end up being scandal. For Jimbo Fisher, it's not scandal at all. But at Florida State by 2017, just 4 years after he won a national championship in 2013, they'd already completely grown tired of him. Nick Saban left LSU after the 2004 season to go coach the Miami Dolphins. That's just right after he'd won a national championship in 2003. For whatever reason, in college football, longevity is a very difficult thing to produce. And honestly, while I'm no fan of Nick Saban, it is one of the things that you have to start giving him a bit of credit for. He's been at Alabama since 2007 and doesn't, at least outward appearances, look to be slowing down all that much. Honestly, that's the kind of thing that you have to tip your hat to a bit and say, he's found a way to hang around for a decade. When a lot of these coaches, 5 minutes ago, it would have seemed impossible to imagine Urban Meyer not being in Ohio State, and now the odds of him not coaching in 2018 are probably higher than coaching. Longevity is not an easy thing to produce, and it's not an easy thing to maintain here. And you got to imagine that Kirby Smart, as wise as he's proven to be, and the people around Kirby Smart, as wise as they've proven to be, they are behind the scenes always working to say, how can we keep the main thing, and keep this train on the tracks and keep it rolling? Not just for the next couple of years, but for the next 20 years. That's the kind of thing that you hope that Georgia behind the scenes is certainly thinking about. Something else that's a really important point here, and I don't know enough about this to fully comment on it, but I got to try to find the comment. Where did it go? Somebody said that if all this happens, and Urban Meyer's out at Ohio State, it could potentially open up transfers at Ohio State like you have had at Ole Miss. And you better believe the feeding frenzy that was around Ole Miss, the Shea Patterson ending up at Michigan, and Van Jefferson ending up at Florida, the feeding frenzy around Ole Miss will pale in comparison to the feeding frenzy on that Ohio State program. If that were to go down, and obviously that's putting the cart way before the horse because we don't yet know what's going to happen with Urban Meyer. But and I wish I could read the commenter's name. I just can't find it right at the moment. But if that goes down, I mean, you got quarterbacks that could play for anybody. I mean, the third string quarterback at Ohio State was Joe Burrow. He's going to maybe be the LSU starter. I mean, so if he's third string, what does that say for like Tate Martell, who's been waiting his turn there at Ohio State, or Haskins, who's the starting quarterback? Probably very good. On and on you could go with just a really, really deep roster there at Ohio State. If that goes down, that's really something to think about. Scott McFadden says, BA, I'm just tuning in. Love Eddie's sign. Yeah, Eddie does have his brand new sign here. He's going to be having this. I will say that I'm still working on sort of getting it affixed to him the way that I want to, but I thought that Eddie needed a little flair, a little color. Y'all been saying this as well. Some of you said, how about a shirt for Eddie? I thought the sign kind of looked better. But the Gator Hater sign for Eddie there in that regard. All right, so we'll take a lot more of your comments here coming up. We've also got Matt Stinchcomb coming up as well for those of you who are just tuning in. We're going to go a little longer today to accommodate Matt, so we'll bring him in just a moment. Let me get ready to dive back into our regular content, though. I've got a little bit more on Urban Meyer for our SEC through. I want to deal with Roquan Smith here a bit as well. I've got an update on the two big announcements I made yesterday, so I'm going to try to cram a lot into the next few minutes and hope you'll join us for it as DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza rolls on right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, here on DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza, let's dive back into our SEC Through here, and I want to go back to the Urban Meyer stuff just for a moment. And obviously, we don't know how it's going to end for him at Ohio State, or even if it is going to end. That's going to be learned in the days ahead. We'll follow it as it does. But the one thing we can start to see happening within the media, given the fact that he's facing some allegations of maybe mishandling a domestic abuse situation at Ohio State, people are starting to reconsider some of the time that he spent at Florida, where he won 2 national championships, but maybe some of the player discipline stuff left something to be desired. Let me give you an example of this coming from Andrea Adelson, who's a writer for ESPN. And in speaking about Meyer here today about what's going on at Ohio State, Adelson also looks back on his time at Florida. This is a pretty damning description of that time in Gainesville for Urban Meyer. On the screen, I'll show this to you. If you're listening, I'll read it to you. Andrea Adelson from ESPN, who says, during Meyer's 6-year tenure at Florida, some 31 players were arrested, with at least 10 accused of crimes ranging from misdemeanor battery to felony domestic assault to felony theft to domestic battery. Punishment varied depending on the player, but let's just say it was uneven at best. That's Andrea Adelson writing today for ESPN. And, if Meyer goes down in shame at Ohio State, does that cast further shame on this time at Florida because of what we now know about Aaron Hernandez, what we now know about some of the other players on that Florida roster? And you start to wonder, can Florida even honor the Meyer era anymore? Because that's a relevant question given the fact that we're 2018. This is the 10-year anniversary of the 2008 Florida National Championship. Could you bring Urban Meyer back on campus to wave to the crowd and celebrate and cheer, given what we think we're about to find out at Ohio State and what maybe we reconsider about his time there at Florida, including the time that Zach Smith spent as an assistant for him there with the Gators? That's a tough question, and it's the kind of thing that I think that that Florida is not too eager to have a conversation about. But there is a lot of media folks coming out of the woodworks to ask some tough questions about Urban Meyer right now. It's also kind of interesting that as Ohio State moves forward with its interim coach, the guy that was not selected to be the interim coach was Ohio State defensive coordinator Greg Schiano. You'll remember from back in the winter, Schiano almost became Tennessee coach. There was a huge outrage on the part of Tennessee fans who did not want Schiano to be their coach. And then the media chastised Tennessee fans for the way they handled this. But it would seem like there's almost some hypocrisy now in the media regarding Schiano at Ohio State that was not present there at Tennessee. Let me show you Ari Wasserman here on Twitter. Wasserman covers the Buckeyes for The Athletic, and on Twitter regarding the decision not to make Greg Schiano interim coach at Ohio State, the tone very different. Here's Ari Wasserman, who says, Ohio State made a strong PR move by making Ryan Day the interim head coach. Maybe Greg Schiano or Kevin Wilson would have made more sense experience-wise, but scandals of their own are the reason they're overqualified coordinators. Day is the safe and right choice. So Ari Wasserman saying that Greg Schiano is sort of touched by scandal. That's not what he said when Tennessee was making the decision about whether to hire him as head coach, and Vols fans are rightly pointing this out. Let me also show you this recent tweet from going back to the wintertime regarding Greg Schiano in Tennessee. The same guy who just mentioned Schiano's scandal says, if Tennessee fans don't want a college coach who has never failed at this level, won at Rutgers, and coached under Urban Meyer for the last 2 years, there's no hope in Knoxville. That's from November from R.A. Wasserman, the same guy who's now talking about the scandal around Greg Schiano prohibiting him from being Ohio State interim coach. That seems hypocritical. I think Tennessee fans are sort of right for potentially being upset about that. Also, something else that's kind of interesting from an SEC standpoint when it comes to the ongoing, I guess, potential scandal involving Urban Meyer. Betting markets now open for you to bet on who's going to coach Ohio State in 2018. Those odds do still include Urban Meyer, although he's no longer the betting favorite to be the Buckeyes coach in 2018. But I couldn't help but notice a couple of the other SEC names who kind of show up as potential candidates to replace Meyer, at least according to the betting markets, which you sort of take with a grain of salt. Lane Kiffin is on there, a bit of a long shot, but Kiffin does show up. I guess he'll be destined to show up on lists like this for time in memoriam. And another name that shows up here as well, and maybe this is a bit more realistic, that's Mississippi State coach Joe Moorhead. Moorhead has ties to the Big Ten, given the fact he was offensive coordinator at Penn State. Maybe as a successful first-year coach in Starkville, could Moorhead draw the attention of the Buckeyes if they're looking for a long-term replacement for Urban Meyer? That's something that folks in Starkville may have to sweat out here in 2018, and we'll make that your SEC through. All right, coming up in just a moment, I've got a couple of DawgNation announcements I want to update you on, including what's going to happen Wednesday with our brand new Before the Hedges show, and what's going to happen on August 23rd with our DawgNation season kickoff. I will do that for you in a moment. Let me, though, as promised, go back in time to earlier in the program when I wanted to speak about Roquan Smith. And I've told you before, I'm not a huge NFL fan. I don't follow a lot of this stuff all that closely necessarily, but I do think that there is something kind of interesting going on with Roquan in the NFL that I at least want to make you aware of, because I think when you hear the details on this, you're going to be on Team Roquan. You like him anyway, but you're going to side with him more after you find out why he's holding out. Chicago Tribune was the first outlet to report these details, I believe, but they were explained very well on the NFL Network by Ian Rappaport. Let me let you hear Rappaport from the NFL Network explaining why Roquan Smith has not yet reported to Bears training camp and won't play with his team tonight in the Hall of Fame game against the Baltimore Ravens. Here is Ian Rappaport from the NFL Network.
It is actually holding up a contract, and you've had to figure it'd be something serious for an agency to hold out a player and say, you know what, you're not going to report until we get this handled. This actually is a fascinating one. I've talked to a lot of executives around the league and agents who deal with these kinds of things who have just been interested in this because we haven't seen this before. And what it is, teams can void the guarantee language on player contracts when players are suspended. For instance, if a player gets a PED suspension, he loses all of his guaranteed money. The way this contract would be written, based on the way it sounds like the Bears like it, would be if he has an on-field incident, if he's suspended for using his helmet under the new helmet rule, Roquan could possibly risk losing his guaranteed money. That's the issue. And we've never dealt with this before, which explains why his agency, CAA, is taking a pretty strong stand.
I mean, come on. You're going to tell me if I'm Roquan Smith, there's a brand new sort of targeting style rule in the NFL? If I'm going to go out and play the game hard like a linebacker's supposed to, and if I get, eventually suspended for that, they're going to void my guaranteed money, my contract? You better believe I'm holding out if I'm Roquan Smith. And I told this to our video audience a little earlier that obviously, I'm sort of biased here, probably, kind of a Roquan Smith supporter. I wouldn't even be paying attention to this story if it was a linebacker from some other school. But now that I am paying attention, you better believe I don't like the idea of Roquan Smith being treated this way. So I'm glad to see him holding out. I hope the holdout continues here until he gets what he wants. And frankly, I hope this sets a precedent for future NFL contracts that you can't void this guaranteed money because of a rule that's probably going to be poorly applied by NFL officials who seem to poorly apply rules all over the place here. One more quick NFL story let me squeeze in here as a part of our DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. John Theus retiring from the NFL. Theus, the former five-star offensive lineman who came to Georgia back at a time when five-star linemen were not choosing Georgia with regularity, has a good career there at UGA, spent some time in the NFL, and he thanks Georgia fans in a message here on social media, which is a really nice touch, nice sentiment there from John Theus, and it's kind of cool now to sort of see where we are in an era when Georgia's collecting five-star offensive linemen on the regular. When Theus chose Georgia coming from the Bowl School, That was not a common occurrence, but he was a DGD at Georgia. He takes a retirement here from football. We certainly wish him well in the next phase of his life. Okay, so before we kind of get going here with some more stuff, let me also kind of go back in time here and give you an update on a couple of announcements we made yesterday. I told you to mark on your calendar our big DawgNation season kickoff. I couldn't tell you the exact date yesterday, but we have sort of zeroed in on that now. The DawgNation season kickoff is going to be on August the 23rd. We're coming up to the up north, up 400 and coming there. The DawgNation season kickoff from 6 to 8 p.m. on Thursday, August 23rd at the brand new Kroger in Cumming on 5550 Bethelview Road in Cumming. They've got one of those crowbars there at the brand new Kroger there in Cumming. We're going to be there for that. We're really excited about that. I'm going to tell you a lot about the days ahead, but please make plans to come out and see us. We'll have some T-shirts to give away. We're going to hang out. We're going to do a lot of stuff, a lot of fun and surprises at the Kroger in Cumming, the brand new one, 5550 Bethelview Road. It's August 23rd. That'll be our way to kick off the season and kind of get things started. We hope you will be with us there for that. Let me also say this, that we are now less than a week away from the re-debut of the new look Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. It's going to be Wednesday at 3 p.m. both next week and every week in the future going forward. Jeff Sintel and I teaming up for what we think is going to be the best recruiting show anywhere. I'm really excited about having Jeff to myself to ask him basically anything we want. You know, we'll deal with some of the fallout, maybe from Urban Meyer stuff, and kind of Jeff's got a great article up at DawgNation.com right now about Jaden Hazelwood. You know, we'll talk a lot about that and all the hot button issues every Wednesday at 3 p.m. for Before the Hedges. Recruiting Talk presented by Kroger right here on the DawgNation video channel you happen to be watching this on right now, and we'll also figure out a way to accommodate some podcast folks as well. So two big things coming up there from DawgNation. We're really excited about both of them. All right, so really good stuff today. A lot to kind of cram in there. I didn't get a chance to do our Dog Day Q&A, but on video you can weigh in on this if you're watching us live, and if you're listening to the podcast, listening to the radio show, you can also weigh in on this at DawgNation Daily on Twitter as a part of the brand new Before the Hedges. What would you like to see be a part of it? I know some people have suggested you make it to a podcast. We'll certainly look into being able to do that. And anything else content-wise you would love to see a part of the brand new Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, weigh in with me on that on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, or drop a comment here in the comment section. We'll make that the subject of our Dog Day Q&A for today. We'll also get ready to close our program up the way we always do. You know, we believe on this program that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater. That's why we look forward to counting down the days until Georgia beats Florida again. It's our Gator Hater Countdown right here on DawgNation Daily. Eddie's showing off his brand new Gator Hater sign. And 86 days from right now, Georgia beats Florida again. It's our Gator Hater Countdown, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Wow, a lot going on the program today, trying to cram it all in. We are not done yet, though. We have got more of your comments coming up. You can do the Dog Day Q&A question with us if you'd like. We're also at around 11 a.m. Eastern Time here live on the program, about the 1 hour mark of the video for those of you who are kind of checking in after the fact. We're going to welcome in We're going to welcome in Matt Stinchcomb. Matt Stinchcomb today on the program. We'll talk to him about the upcoming Georgia season, his thoughts on that. And he's got a great event to preview on Saturday that he and his brother John Stinchcomb are doing in concert with our buddy David Green here. It's to benefit the Georgia Transplant Foundation and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Really, really cool thing at the College Football Hall of Fame on Saturday night. Matt Stinchcomb will tell you all about that here coming up in just a moment. While we're waiting on Matt, though, we do have some time for more of your comments, and we'll look forward to taking those. Jeffrey Edwards asks, is Eddie holding the sign with his cast on? Yes, Jeffrey, Eddie still does have his cast on with Jake Fromm in solidarity, at least until we see Fromm hands-free there with no cast or anything on his hand. Eddie's still got his on for right now. Winfred Steinspring says, how about a tour of the new locker room and a recruit center? Yeah, I'm hoping we can get a camera in there at some point in time. I haven't heard anything from Georgia about that officially, but I'm hoping that we can get some cameras in there to show that off, or if nothing else, maybe Georgia will get its own cameras in there. Now, if you go to the forum at forum.dawgnation.com, in Jeff's thread where he kind of covered the reveal last week, he put a lot of the social media stuff from recruits when they took pictures or took videos. There's some of that kind of stuff in there. I want to say that Deion Sanders' son also took a fairly long video from in there. You might want to check that out, but we're going to try to get our own video in there as well, too. James Crump says the recruiting process is wearing Jaden Hazelwood out. He probably wishes he could be in fall camp with Georgia this year. Yeah, I think, James, you're probably right about that. I actually bumped into Hazelwood the other day, and he said very much the same thing, that he is getting tired of a lot of this attention. So I kind of feel sorry for him a little bit in that regard. Maurice Carter says, is it me or does it seem let me get Maurice's comment. Is it me or does it seem so unexpected to hear this kind of thing happening to Urban Meyer in Ohio State and not Jim Harbaugh in Michigan? I don't know. I mean, I think all of this is somewhat surprising in some respects. Richard Smith says, how does somebody in Texas get one of those shirts? Richard, you know that anytime we do T-shirts, I'm always going to do my best to accommodate our DawgNation friends who are sort of stretched out all across DawgNation, not just in the state of Georgia, but all across the place. We'll try to do our best we can to take care of all of that. Derek Burt says on the Facebook comment section, how much better will the passing game be this year? Lots of tight throws last year. I think that's, to go back to the Jaden Hazelwood conversation, Derek, I think that may be one of the things that is something that Hazelwood's going to be paying close attention to. How much better this passing offense is going to be this season? I think on terms of an efficiency basis in 2017 is pretty good. From on his yards per attempt number, his completion percentage on deep throws, numbers like that spoke pretty highly of Fromm. But the issue for a wide receiver is there still wasn't a large number of throws overall, not as many targets for wide receivers. I do think in 2018 there'll be more of that. I think there's more time to throw this season. I think there's a more experienced quarterback leading the way as the starter in Jake Fromm. I think all that works to the advantage of Georgia here in terms of just having a more successful passing attack. But I think it's probably also fair to say that Jaden Hazelwood's probably paying close attention to that. I'll go to YouTube here in a moment. Good question here. Somebody says, who says this? Keith Finney says, BA, what happens to Roquan if he doesn't get a deal signed? My guess is at some point in time, that's probably not going to be an issue. I mean, we saw the same thing with Julio Jones, where, both sides sort of draw their line in the sand. They kind of marshal up their forces, and then cooler heads sort of prevail. Time is always the thing that motivates contracts to get done. Almost no contract ever gets signed unless you're on a true deadline, because anytime you're not at a deadline, one side or the other is going to feel like they have negotiating leverage. But now, first, preseason game is going to go down for the Bears. After this, I think the responsibility is on the Bears to get Roquan in camp here. So at that point in time, I think this gets done. But I guess if you want to just sort of extrapolate the most hypothetical scenario, I'm pretty sure that, let's say that a deal didn't get signed at all. We've seen this happen sometimes in other sports where if Roquan sat out a year, at that point in time, I believe he'd go out. I believe he'd be eligible to be drafted again. We've seen this in baseball. I want to say J.D. Drew got drafted twice. He didn't sign the first time, didn't go to college, I don't think, or maybe he left Florida State. I can't remember. But then he got drafted again. So you can sort of sit out and then get drafted again. I know that was the threat that John Elway, I think, put out when he didn't want to play for the Colts. And then I think a similar threat was sort of put together by Eli Manning, who didn't want to play for the Chargers. Is that the team that Eli Manning didn't want to play for? So I guess if you wanted to really be hypothetical about this, if you were to sit out a full year, you'd be drafted again. Let me hop over to YouTube for a second. We're about 2 minutes away from Matt Stinchcomb here as well, which is going to be a lot of fun. Let me down to the most recent YouTube comment. All right. Al Clement says, I'm 72 years old, and I feel like I could be a running back behind our offensive line this season. Yeah, I know what you mean about that. I mean, we talked about this with John Theus a moment ago. I mean, Theus is a 5-star that comes to Georgia. And was that class of 2012? Is that right? 2012 for Theus? I mean, think about the offensive linemen that Georgia signs in 2013, and 2014, 2015. Think about the dearth of Georgia offensive linemen drafted in the NFL. I mean, it was really, for a coach in Mark Richt, who I think there's a lot to like, it was one of the areas in which he probably did not do enough for the Georgia program, and it's kind of a nice thing to think about where Georgia is in that regard right now. I believe we may have Matt Stinchcomb ready to go. Okay, good. Y'all, thanks for being with us today. A little bit different format, but you're going to love Matt Stinchcomb, and you're going to really be excited about the big event he's got coming up on Saturday In fact, let's get ready to welcome in Matt Stinchcomb right now. He is a former Georgia great and a terrific analyst now on the SEC Network. He's a good friend of us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza as well. It is Matt Stinchcomb. Matt, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm trying to stay dry, as we all are here in the Atlanta area.
What a rainy...
Little did we know.
Yeah,
no
no
drought
doubt.
conditions, that's for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Very rainy time here in the state of Georgia, which makes you sort of long for those fall Saturdays in Athens even more with some nice, pleasant, sunny weather. This is not the kind of weather that I enjoy whatsoever, so we hope that you do stay dry with that. And, Matt, before we're done, I want to talk to you about a big event that you and your brother John Stinchcomb and our buddy David Green all have going on this weekend. This is a really cool opportunity for some Georgia fans. I want to tell people all about that. Before we get to that, let me get some thoughts from you on the upcoming Georgia season. And you're obviously, have seen a lot of Georgia teams over the years, maybe not one quite like this one, who's got a lot of recent memories to sort of, take stock of here. Whether it be the good of, having been in the playoff and having won the SEC, or maybe the bad memory of almost winning the national championship before coming up short. How does Georgia bounce back from all of that and sort of push all of that to the past and kind of focus on what's going on here in the present?
Yeah, I think that it was such a magical season in a lot of different ways. When you look at how you performed versus your traditional rivals, and in dominant fashion winning those games, and being capable of avenging a loss on the plains to a very good Auburn team, get a conference championship, beat Notre Dame on the road, the Rose Bowl game, which is going to go down, in the rather extensive annals of that game as probably the best contest they've ever had played, and the granddaddy of them all, with two non-traditional participants, right? A Big 12 team and an SEC team put together the best Rose Bowl ever. I think that losing that national championship, people say, it's a distraction. How do you bounce back from it? From a coaching standpoint, like if you look at what Dabo Swinney does, he does a great job of playing up this underdog mentality at Clemson, which, you have to get these kids good and confused and turned around to think that Clemson's an underdog. When you look at their facilities and, they contend for 2 national titles in a row. But you can get that accomplished, with short attention spans. Next thing you know, hey, we're the underdog guys. So, but you look at the way his teams have performed in that regard, coaches can trade on that sort of thing. The difficult part is getting them to compete at a high level when they're consistently winning and enjoying a championship caliber play to keep them focused. And I'm not saying it's a good thing that Georgia lost the national title game. What I am saying is that's something that you can leverage. And the guys that are on that team, and many of them are returning, guys that will now get a chance to contribute, they were there for it. They experienced it. As long as they don't take it for granted, they don't think that you're entitled to get to play for championships just because you're at Georgia, and they recognize that no matter how close you get, you still have to keep fighting, then I think coaches, they can kind of use that as dry powder.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And, if Kirby Smart was sitting here, Matt, one of the things he would say is he's worried about his leadership. He said that many times over the course of the offseason. You lose Nick Chubb, you lose Sonny Michel, you lose Lorenzo Carter, Roquan Smith, Davin Bellamy. In addition to being very good players, they were terrific leaders. And as Georgia gets going on the practice field on Friday and throughout the rest of the summer, I think that's the thing that Kirby Smart's paying the closest attention to. You were obviously a leader for Georgia. How difficult is it to find new leaders to replace these guys who may be among the all-time best leaders that Georgia's had, at least in recent memory?
Well, they're not going to be able to replace their experience because that's kind of an outlier now. Guys don't play for 4 years. It just doesn't happen. So to have all those guys come back, and not only, they contributed, I think just about all of them, in all 4 seasons. Some guys might stick around for 4 years because they get to play early in their career and they want to embellish what they've been able to do. But these guys, for them to stick around for 4 years, you just don't see that very often. And to have that number of players that contributed for 4 years and also be among your best players, because you want your best players to be your leaders. That's their best position to have the most influence on the team. So it's not always easy, but you can lead as an individual that's not one of the more prominent players on the team. You can figure out a way to contribute in a leadership capacity, and a lot of it's maybe even nonverbal. I don't picture Nick Chubb being the most verbose, rah-rah, pom-pom, pump-em-up kind of a guy, but you better believe that the rest of the balance of that team's paying attention to what Nick Chubb's doing from a preparation standpoint, how he carries himself, how he handles adversity, how he overcomes adversity. All of those things matter. But he also had 3 previous years to draw on before this last season. So, I think it's going to be very difficult. It'd be difficult for any program to have that caliber of leadership with that level of experience. That's a pretty potent combination. There's not many programs out there in the country that could have that combination of both the experience and the leadership potential. And I should throw in a third variable, just the performance on the field that Georgia enjoyed from those guys last year. That said, doesn't mean that it's going to be this huge vacuum. It'll just have different elements to it this year.
A lot of people are curious about your college football opinions. I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot already. But how do you think that Kirby Smart will handle Jake Fromm and Justin Fields, these 2 dynamic quarterbacks on the same roster together? How do you think he should handle it? I mean, this is a pretty unique circumstance that Georgia's dealing with this season. How do you think it all unfolds?
It's hard to imagine Justin Fields not having a role in the offense, as talented a kid as he is from all reports. And by talented, I mean just beyond the physical skill set, just his approach to the game, his awareness, understanding of what it is they want to accomplish, which of course is really difficult for him to be as advanced, maybe as Fromm is, and of course the same would have been true for Fromm a year ago, trying to be as advanced as Eason is. There's being no substitute for the experience in the system. But I think that because he's got a distinct skill set, or at least an additional skill set, I should say, because it's not like he can't throw the football well, but because he brings that mobile element, why you wouldn't want to have that as a threat to an opposing team's defense, and to have them have to prepare for packages like that. Now, I would be surprised if we didn't see Justin Fields with that type of ability to impact the game via packages within the offense. A lot of people have drawn comparison to when David Green and DJ Shockley were sharing time. Whether it's addressed the way that that situation was addressed, where Shockley had a designated series, he was going to come in, it was kind of a known, and he'd get a handful of snaps. I don't know that approach is what they'll ultimately adopt, but I would be shocked if Justin Fields doesn't have a role in every game plan that we actually see on the field on Saturdays.
Let me follow up on that real quick, because if you look at the situation in Alabama, which is not totally dissimilar with Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, it's 2 really good quarterbacks. If I had to guess, Matt, I don't think that Nick Saban loves how that's played out this offseason with Averian Hurts, Jalen's dad, threatening a transfer, Tua Tagovailoa speaking in Hawaii, his home state, talking about the possibility that he might have left the school after the 2017 season had he not played the national championship. Is that just an unavoidable scenario, or is there a way for Kirby Smart and James Coley, the quarterback's coach, and Jim Chaney, the offensive coordinator, to keep both Fromm and Fields happy over the long term here?
Well, it's been done before. DJ Shockley waited
True.
his turn a long time. And, can they do it at Alabama? It's a different conversation, I think, because you're also dealing with a guy that was, the Offensive Player of the Year for the entire conference as a true freshman. And the other guy who came in and rescued his offense and his team's title hopes, quite literally, with his play in the second half in a national title game. And apparently, and by many accounts, performed very well throughout the season in practice, and had others thinking perhaps he might have been a more viable option. Nobody can begrudge Alabama for staying with Jalen Hurts as long as they did. It got them all the way to the national title game. But it's a luxury to have a talent like a Tagovailoa to just go to in the second half. And let's be real, it was out of necessity. Credit Coach Saban to some extent. Everybody acts like this was a courageous decision to make. It was born of necessity. That offense was going nowhere. And it made the most sense to make that change. I don't foresee it. It's distinct at Georgia because not only Jake Fromm, as accomplished as he was as a freshman, was not the Offensive Player of the Year for the conference, number one, and Justin Fields, hasn't even had an opportunity to contribute in a game yet. Whereas, in Alabama, you've got two guys that have made very significant contributions to the success of their program on the field of play in the games when the scoreboard's lit up. So, the situation in Georgia is separate and apart from Alabama in that regard.
Big event coming up this Saturday night that Georgia fans are going to want to know all about. Matt, I want you to tell me about that in just a moment. Before that, let me squeeze in one more question. Obviously, you were a great offensive lineman at Georgia, and it's really been kind of fun to watch over the last couple of years. This Georgia program evolved to the point where I think in 2018, it's really going to be defined by Sam Pittman's offensive line. A dominant group. It seems hard to imagine this group not being very successful this season. As a former offensive lineman yourself, how much fun is it for you to watch how big a part of the story for Georgia good offensive line play has become?
Well, it's become a point of emphasis. That's the part that I think I like the most. You can take nothing away from what was accomplished in the 15 years with Coach Rick. However, there was, at least relative to what we're seeing now, a marginalization of any emphasis on offensive line and offensive line play, and that, from a recruiting standpoint, there were some good players signed, but it wasn't nearly as emphasized as it is now. There was a different approach, different philosophy, but having played the game at that position and looking at this conference and noting the teams that consistently have the most success, they typically are the ones that are capable of getting a yard when they need a yard. And that's not just on a running back. To me, the way Georgia has emphasized that, and this was true at Arkansas, and it wasn't just because of Brett Bielema's mentality, it just so happened that Sam Pittman was the offensive line coach there as well. That offensive line was a centerpiece. Most teams will tell you this, but this oftentimes, and especially now, they pay lip service to the importance of the lines of scrimmage. But to hear this and see it actually happening, when Kirby Smart came to Athens, there was a certain style of play that he wanted to be capable of playing. And in year one, Georgia wasn't ready for that. Personnel-wise, they just weren't ready for that. Credit them for adapting and adopting a different offensive philosophy or modulating it to the personnel they had available over the course of the season. Now, I think that they are afforded from a personnel standpoint up front to do about what it is that they intend to do from the outset, and yet still employ some of the newer concepts. If you've got a good offensive front, the world is your oyster. You don't have to coach around that. That's a pretty significant piece of your offense, if it isn't a strength, to have to coach around each week in your game planning.
One of the things that always lets me know we're getting ready for the start of the season, we start talking about Dogs for Kids, the great event that you and your brother John Stinchcomb do with former Georgia quarterback David Green. And it's coming up this Saturday night at the College Football Hall of Fame. And, Matt, as you know, and one of the things I think it makes it such a great event is it benefits great cause like the Georgia Transplant Foundation, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. And, Matt, this is the kind of thing I think a lot of Georgia fans are going to want to be a part of. Could you tell us more about what's going to go down on Saturday night and kind of how people that are interested can partner with you guys and actually maybe even be there in the building there that night?
Sure. Although I don't know how much space we have left. I know that we have some. So folks would want to jump on it if they could. It's Saturday night at the Hall of Fame. It's a great venue. And we've got a lot of the former Georgia greats, DJ Shockley and David Green and Eric Zier and Aaron Murray. We'll hear from Shockley and Green and to talk a little bit about what their dynamic was at quarterback when they were sharing time. And it's not dissimilar, obviously, to what Georgia may potentially see this year at quarterback with Fromm and Field. And there's a list of Muhammad Massaquoi, last year Garrison Hurst and Marcus Stroud, and the guys that people grew up watching the game and watching Georgia on Saturdays. Some guys that had really accomplished careers, but have since gone on to be just great contributing members to society. So we're pretty excited about that, and it's really more than anything, it's a celebration of what the two charities that benefit from the cause itself, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and Georgia Transplant Foundation, are accomplishing for kids, not just in the state of Georgia, but throughout the Southeast and even nationally, that need life-saving organ transplants. And so we've been really grateful to be a part of this effort for years and years, and I'm grateful to our former teammates and the fans and companies that support it on behalf of these charities to help give these kids quite literally a second lease on life.
Well, Matt, I will say this on behalf of the Georgia fans that remember your career. They're incredibly proud of seeing the great work you do on the SEC Network each and every week, and the fact that you're giving back to the community with events like this, you and your brother and all the other Georgia players who kind of a part of this. Thanks for being such a great member of the community. We appreciate your time here on our Dog Nation Daily here today, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Brandon, thanks so much for having us on. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good stuff there from Matt Stinchcomb. Appreciate y'all staying with us late to check that out here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza today. We'll be back normal time tomorrow, also kind of a normal schedule. We'll let the folks who help us and work with us get off the air here at 11 a.m. so they can get on with the rest of their day. But we thank them for staying late with us. Thank you for being here with us as well. Podcasts will be posted if you missed a part of the regular broadcast, especially if you're just checking in at 11:15. This is a little bit later than we're normally on the air here. But really good stuff. You can check that out. Thanks to Marco's Pizza for making it all possible. We'll see you Wednesday for Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Really excited about that, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Mark that day down on your calendar for every week moving forward. And then tomorrow, back at 10 a.m., looking a lot at Georgia practice. What's going to unfold? We'll do it. We'll have Jeff Sintel as well. We'll enjoy you as a part of it, too. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We'll see you then.